Okay, so let's just look at a 12 lead real quick. This is going to be a quick video. Um, we're just trying to identify like what we're looking at here. We're not going into anything crazy, just so you guys can at least make sense of what you're looking at. So let me get my pen out here. As you can see on the screen, we've got a whole bunch of different leads, and some of them look different than the others. Okay, and that's fine. They're supposed to be like that. So let's just break everything off into our sections, right? If you remember, you've got your limb leads, which is your 1, 2, and 3. And then your limb leads also include your augmented voltage leads, which is AVR, AVL, AVF. Okay. And then you have your chest leads, right, on the actual 12 lead. So if you wasn't to do a 12 lead, you would pretty much get everything to the left, right? But once you do actual 12 lead and you connect the chest leads, then you're going to get all this stuff over here to the right. So your chest leads include V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, and V6, okay? So now we need to look at what these leads mean. So I like to think of it like a camera angle, right? So if you had a person that was like doing a photo shoot, for example, and the photographer is doing the photo shoot, that person might stay perfectly still, and a photographer might wander around them taking shots from more of a straight on, a left, a right, up, down angle, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of the similar type of thing that's going on right here. So we need to break off this 12 lead into different sections, okay? And we do that for the purposes of, number one, finding ischemia, which we'll use later to diagnose MIs, and other things as well. But when we're looking at just identifying the rhythm, we're not going to use really the sections, okay? So let's just one thing at a time here. So V1 and V2 are a section, and we'll use different colors here because we're fancy like that. So V1 and V2 are going to be the septal leads. Okay, septal leads. V3 and V4 are going to be called your anterior leads, because what's happening here is V1 and V2 look at the septum of the heart. And remember, all of this is looking at the left ventricle. Okay, so V3 and V4 are looking at the anterior portion of the left ventricle. Okay, now you're going to have lead 1. This is just something you got to memorize, guys. Okay, so lead 1, AVL, V5, and V6. Those are going to be your lateral leads, okay? Your lateral leads. If you want to be specific, 1 and AVL are your high lateral leads, and V5 and V6 are your low lateral leads. And you don't have to remember that, but you should. Well, how do you always remember? Like a trick I used to remember was, well, how do I remember 1 and AVL are the high lateral, V5 are the low lateral? Well, these are literally like higher on the paper than these are. That's just how I always remembered it when I was learning all this, right? So V1, V2 septal, V3, V4 are anterior, 1 AVL, V5, V6 are lateral leads, okay? And then you've got 2, 3, and AVF. You'll notice I skipped AVR, and that's okay. We don't really care about AVR for right now. So 2, 3, and AVF are going to be your inferior leads. So those are going to look at the inferior portion of the left ventricle. 1 AVL, V5, V6 are going to look at the lateral portion of the left ventricle. And V1 through V4 are going to look at the septal and the anterior portion. Okay. So there's going to be a term that we use called anatomically contiguous. Well, what does that mean? That means that they are sections that belong to the same coronary artery supply. Okay. So like if you're asking like, okay, cool, we're breaking these things off into sections. Why do I care? Right. Well, the reason is that the anterior portion of the heart is supplied with its blood, its perfusion is, well, it would be better to say the anterior portion of the heart is perfused by a different coronary artery than the lateral portion, which is perfused by a different coronary artery than the inferior portion. Okay. So that being said, you can look at this in its anatomically contiguous groupings, and you can determine when we get to like diagnosing MIs, for example, you can determine and say, hey, listen, this person has an MI in the inferior leads. Well, I know the inferior leads are associated with the right coronary artery. Okay, so that's going to be you know, beneficial to you. So let's look at what these arteries are. So I know that V1 and V2 are septal, V3 or V4 are anterior, but I'm going to group them, and a lot of people are as well. And a lot of people are going to say V1 through V4 are anatomically contiguous. Okay, so V1 through V4 are anatomically contiguous. Okay, and these are going to be supplied by the LAD, left anterior descending artery. If you ever heard of the quote unquote widowmaker before, that's what we're talking about right now. Left anterior descending artery. Okay. The lateral leads are going to be excuse me, I can't talk. Are going to be supplied by the circumflex artery, LCX, the circumflex artery, right, which wraps around the side and the back as well. And the inferior portion is kind of interesting because even though we're looking at the left ventricle, the inferior portion, if you remember your anatomy, is not supplied by a branch of the left coronary artery, but it's supplied by a branch of the right coronary artery, because the right coronary artery perfuses the right side of the heart, and then it comes and wraps around the very bottom of the right side and kind of terminates at the tip of the inferior portion of the left ventricle, right? So this is going to be supplied by your right coronary artery. So this is going to be stuff that you just got to memorize, okay? So that's pretty much how the groupings of all of this stuff work. So V1, V2 are your septal leads, V3, V4 are your anterior leads, V5, V6, 1 AVL are your lateral leads, 2, 3 AVF are your inferior leads, okay? Why do I look at these groupings? I will look at these groupings for different reasons. When I'm trying to diagnose myocardial infarctions, when I'm trying to look for hypertrophies, whether it be atriums or ventricles, different reasons, okay, and stuff that we get into later. But for now, we are going to just look at a 12 lead all the way across. So when I'm looking to diagnose an MI, I'm going to look at this 12 lead and I'm going to look at V1, V2, V3, V4. And then I'm going to look at 1 AVL, V5, V6. And then I'm going to look at 2, 3 AVF. That's just how I do it. Some people like to start with 2, 3 AVF first and kind of do the opposite of what I just did. And that's okay too. You can do whatever you want, whichever is more comfortable. Like I have a method to my madness, so to speak, which we'll talk about later. There's just a reason I do it that way, and it's just what I like to do. But they're all both okay. But that being said, when I'm not worrying about MIs, which we're not there yet, when I'm just like, hey, here's a 12 lead, what's the rhythm? I don't care about any of these anatomical groupings. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen right now. I don't care about any of these as anatomical groupings. When I want to say what rhythm is this, I'm literally going to start here and I'm going to work my way all the way across the paper. And I don't really care about the leads, okay? And the best way to do it is to use lead 2. So lead 2 is the best rhythm the best lead to figure out what rhythm is this patient in. Now, for some reason, or if for whatever reason, I should say, that you think that lead 3, AVF, V3, and V4 are a little bit easier to read because they print it out a little bit more clear, right? Then then read 3 AVF, V3, V6, or whatever it is, all the way across, right? So it doesn't really matter, like whichever you use to diagnose the rhythm, like who cares? Just pick one and go from left to right. So when you're diagnosing rhythms on a 12 lead, just read it from left to right all the way across. When you get later into diagnosing MIs and hypertrophies and all that kind of stuff, then you got to look at the individual segments by themselves isolated that we just kind of mentioned earlier. Okay. So the 12 lead that you're looking at is most likely from a life back monitor that they use in fire rescue, EMS, stuff like that. You do see them in the hospitals occasionally, mostly like attached to code carts and stuff. But not all 12 leads look the same. So I wanted to show you a couple different ones just so you can see what I'm talking about. So this has a little bit more artifact, is not as clear, but you'll notice there is like a fourth line on the bottom, whereas the other one only had 3 lines. Okay, well, let's see what's going on here. This is more common in a hospital-based machine, and these are actually a little bit better. At least I like them a little bit better, because you'll notice that you have your groupings here. So you got V1, V2, V3, V4 anterior, right? One AVL, I'm sorry, septal anterior. One AVL, V5, V6 lateral, right? 2, 3 AVF inferior, right? But remember, we said when we're doing a rhythm, we don't care about all that. We're just going left to right. So now normally in the previous 12 lead, I would have just probably picked lead 2 and went all the way across. And I realized that this looks a little bit different than this, but that's because the leads are different. It's a different camera angle, and different camera angles are going to look differently. And that's okay. It's kind of supposed to be that way. But you'll notice on a hospital-based 12 lead, this, if you look right here, is lead 2 all the way across. So a lot of times what the hospital machines will do is that will give you a 12 lead that has your normal 12 lead. And then at the bottom, it has one lead all the way across to make rhythm identification a little bit easier for you. Because if you look from here to here, right, because it's one lead, all of this is the same. It looks the same, right? But if you look through right here, you got to go across 4 different leads, and you can do it, but it looks a little bit different from one lead to the next, to the next, to the next. So on a nice normal sinus rhythm, it's no problem. You can do it either way. But when things start to get a little weird or they start to get a little ugly, it can get a little bit more tricky. So having that one lead all the way across at the very bottom is beneficial. And I've even seen hospital-based 12 leads that will give you like 3 of them all the way across. So it literally has like 6 lines going from the top to the bottom of this paper, whereas it has your normal 12 lead on the first top 3 lines, and then it has like 2 all the way across, 3 all the way. You can just program it to put whichever one you want all the way across, right? So I just wanted to show you that the differences between some of these 12 leads. But at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. You're just using a different machine, a little bit different equipment, a little different software. It might look a little bit different, but it's all really the same thing. Okay, so that's the key. So for right now, guys, the purpose of this video was just to explain what the leads were, what they're looking at. I would definitely know those coronary arteries. You're going to need to learn those because when we get into the next module, it's going to definitely play a big role. And for those of you who are interested in the yearly challenge bowl and things like that, the FAPA convention a couple of months ago at Marco Island, there was literally a question that was asked in the competition that was just like, hey, what leads are associated with the right coronary artery or something like that, something along those lines. Or maybe it was 2-3 AVF, what coronary artery was it? Maybe it was that way. So this stuff comes up, right? You'll see it on tests. You'll see it in real life. It's important to clinical practice. And if you are interested in challenge bowl like activities, then it'll show up there too, right? So this is something you got to learn. All right. So if you're looking for what the rhythm is on a 12 lead, pick a lead and go all the way across the paper. If you're looking at MIs and stuff, we're going to talk about that later. Then you look at the anatomic groupings. And that's it for now.